my mind is telling candidates they can distance themselves from him. Here's the thing. His operation may say that, but I cannot imagine that Donald Trump himself will like that. It can be a politician, a business person, anyone out there. If they distance themselves, if they turn on him in any way, he'll come for you.
Here's the difference this time around, Steph, and I think this is very important, is that Donald Trump is effectively isolated, right? There's a small group of people that feed him information. And unless information about specific candidates or lawmakers gets to him, you're not going to see him put out true social posts or stand on a campaign stage and lash out. And that is what is happening this time around. Associates of Donald Trump, those operatives that are running essentially his operation and that of the large national GOP groups that are trying to help Senate and House lawmakers hold on to the majority this November, are acknowledging that Donald Trump is going to say whatever he's going to say. He's going to talk about his ballroom. He's going to talk about blowing up Iran. He's going to talk about that this is the golden age of the American economy. But as one person told me, it's been made pretty damn implicit to the Republican candidates that they don't have to take that same sort of messaging out on the road on the economy and the Iran war, because voters just know that it's not the reality that they're living. And Republicans up and down the ballot know that here as well. And that is what is so striking, is that there is that tacit acknowledgement to these candidates that, you know, don't necessarily go out there and rail against Donald Trump, but you can also focus on things you want to focus on. And I was told by one person that was familiar with a prominent Senate Republican candidate running that they turned down a TV interview when it became known that it was going to be on Iran, because it's not a good subject matter to talk to. And this is a moment here where Donald Trump, you know, cannot be controlled, and the associates and those operatives working with him know that. So they're trying to do their best to at least help candidates, give them the head nod that they understand this weird situation that they're in right now.
Then, Susan, what is a good area for those Republican candidates to focus on? Besides, we know what they're going to, trying to claim that Democrats are fast-tracking us to communism. What is a good argument? Because based on the most recent reporting, Republicans are worried that 20% of their reliable voting base isn't going to come out.
Yeah, Steph, I was really struck by that as well. In the latest Washington Post survey, I think there was a 10-point gap in enthusiasm. CNN had an interesting take on this about a week or so earlier, looking at who had actually turned out so far in the primaries, which, it's not a perfect measure of who's going to turn out in the fall. But I was really struck by the fact that it was something like 57% of the turnout so far this year in primaries had been among Democrats. Again, not a perfect measure, but it clearly shows there's an enthusiasm gap, and that it's even wider than the last Trump midterm in 2018, 2 years into his first term in office. So Democrats have the numbers right, although I think Shane's reporting is really important here on the money piece of it. That gap is enormous when it comes to what you can do with late spending in a campaign. And this comes back to the question of what, if anything, are Republicans running on? I'm seeing them run the same old playbook because they are scared to deviate too much from Donald Trump. Again and again and again, we look for this moment when there's going to be some kind of a Republican break from Donald Trump. And quite frankly, it just hasn't happened. I listen to reports like that, and it seems to me that you have a bunch of Republican strategists who are still so scared of poking the bear on their own side. They're sort of gently signaling to their own candidates like, oh, it's okay to talk about the economy. Of course it's okay to talk about the economy, because that's the most important issue for American voters in every election. But right now, I don't see what Republicans can do except scare people with the boogeyman of communists, as you said, Steph.
Okay, well, now the House is on recess for a month. So these lawmakers are theoretically in their home district, actually with their constituents. They've got hundreds of millions of dollars to put out these TV ads. What will the ads say? What arguments are they making to their voters?
I mean, I think Susan just touched on it, right? Voters have said they're unhappy with Donald Trump. They're unhappy with what they're seeing out of Washington. And so what the Republican Party is going to run on is be scared of what the Democrats would do if they got back power. That would start with saying it's going to be gridlock, and voters don't like gridlock, and it would be continue with immigration, and all these other issues where they're going to say
immigration, which is no longer a winning issue for Donald Trump. The economy, which is no longer a winning issue for Donald Trump. Education, we no longer even have a federal funded Department of Education. And last I checked, healthcare costs a whole lot more, and we're at war.
I mean, this is the challenge. If you are the party in power and you have a president with record low approval ratings, you can't talk about the president, right? That's not a winning message. You're going to try to talk about the other side. This is typically what the parties in power do in a midterms.
Sure.
And this is what they're going to try to do, right? And there's not a sign that it's going to work, but they certainly have.
All right, and we have a great political panel to break all of this down. I'm going to start with MS Now White House reporter Jake Traylor, who is traveling with the president, MS Now political director Shauna Thomas, MS Now senior Washington reporter and co-host of The Weekend, Eugene Daniels, and former senior advisor to Vice President Kamala Harris, Democratic strategist Mike Nellis. Good to see all of you guys this morning. Jake, I'm going to start with you. You've been traveling with the president. What is awaiting him in Michigan today?
Yeah, look, what's awaiting him are increasingly candidates who are given permission from Trump's top aides and allies, midterm strategists, saying, hey, it's actually okay for you to distance yourself from the president's messaging on Iran, on the economy. These are key issues that normally a Trump that we're used to over the past decade, if someone does not lock in step with him, he's primarying them, he's attacking them on Truth Social. We're seeing a different side of the coin here where Republican strategists are coming to reckon with the fact that the president is so underwater right now, it would actually be okay for some of these Republican candidates across swing states like Michigan, where we are today, to actually have some room, some distance between themselves and President Trump. When we look at who's going to be here today, Representative Tom Barrett, someone that Trump has endorsed, he voted twice this summer to limit Trump's war powers. The Senate candidate, Mike Rogers, who also Trump has endorsed. This is someone who has been vocal about criticism against some of Trump's policies about having Chinese manufacturing in the United States here. So what's partially happening is a reckoning of sorts of political operatives saying the most strategic thing we can do here is actually allow some separation to exist. And that's even manifesting in the way we talked to some Republican operatives who told us they are not going to Trump like they normally would and telling the president that normally when a candidate goes against him, they come to the president, they tell him about this, he goes out on Truth Social and attacks them. This time around, they're kind of letting those things slide and trying to keep the president's focus on messaging of his own, not mixing with the candidates like normal.
Mike, how long do you think this longer leash could last? And if it does in fact last, and Republicans are able to adjust their messaging, be a little bit more in opposition to the president, is that going to have to change the game that Democrats play for these midterms?
No, I'd give it till the end of the day. I don't think Donald Trump has the type of discipline to let people get beyond his MAGA movement. He's made it very clear the Republican Party is his party. If you speak out against him, he's going to have you primaried and removed, like he did with Thomas Massie over the war in Iran and the Epstein files cover up. I think that White House aides can say whatever they want in public, behind the scenes, to candidates, whatever. Donald Trump is going to undermine every bit of that. And you already saw it earlier today because the Senate Republicans put out a video this morning talking about how they have to protect Donald Trump's Senate majority. That's not the way you talk when you are putting together an opportunity for your candidates to create distance from an unpopular president. Nancy Pelosi, Barack Obama, actual good political leaders understood that. Donald Trump is too vain to let his candidates get away with that.
Eugene, I'm curious what you're going to be watching for as the president is in Michigan. But then we also have all of this Democratic infighting taking place in their key Senate race right now. And what risk you see for the Democrats here of them losing an opportunity to sort of prosecute their case against this president and all the Republicans down ballot from him and kind of getting caught up in their own internal divisions over progressivism, centrism, and party personalities?
On Trump in Michigan, I want to see how long he's able to stay on message and talk about the candidates that he's there for, talking about winning in Michigan, whether it be the Senate or these House races. How long he's able to do that is always a key tell to how much he actually cares about something. I imagine that he's mostly going to talk about the Save America Act. I imagine that he's mostly going to talk about, his lies about the election being stolen in 2020. He talked about Michigan in his speech. I guess that could have been last week, could have been a year ago at this point, based on how time is moving nowadays. But when it comes to Democrats, what's so interesting is, and what folks should remember, is that this is a seat they have to hold on to, because this is a Democratic seat. This is not an opportunity for them to pick up like in Alaska, where they're feeling good, like in Ohio, like in Iowa. This is somewhere where they have to actually win. And I think what I've heard from folks on the ground is that Haley Stevens is kind of having this moment, right? A lot of it's happening online. It's hard to see how much of that is working on the ground. But her biggest bet is going to be with Black voters, right? Black voters, as we say all the time, more pragmatic, a little bit more moderate. But the question for Abdul El-Sayed is he able, both in this primary and if he wins in November, going to be able to galvanize people in a way to overcome any losses from the moderates maybe staying home for a Senate race like this? And I think the thing that's interesting about Democrats is they always are having these kinds of beefs, right? It's always a back and forth. They're always fighting between the progressivism or a moderate streak that they want to have. And I think, honestly, a lot of it is kind of overblown. The idea that the Democratic Socialists of America have taken over the Democratic Party is just not true.
We're watching Republicans distance themselves from Trump in two clear ways. First, there's a mass exodus from Congress. Some representatives have already walked away. Marjorie Taylor Greene actually quit her seat. Others are being more low-key about it, but Trump is still the reason they're going. They're retiring and finishing their current terms, but they're making it clear they won't run again in November. In several cases, they've openly said they don't want another 2 years dealing with Donald Trump. This creates a real problem for Republicans. Here's why: even if you'd never personally vote for these GOP politicians, sitting members of Congress usually win elections more easily than newcomers. It's just how it works. People tend to stick with the familiar name, especially after the primary battles are over. Unless there's a major controversy, the person already in office has the edge. Losing experienced politicians opens doors for Democrats to potentially win those seats, depending on the district. Then there's the second type of abandonment: Republicans are backing away from the MAGA movement itself. What's really telling is that the White House seems unable to stop this. Now, Trump will probably go back on any agreement. You can't count on his word. But here's what matters: the White House is actually telling Republican candidates they can publicly separate themselves from MAGA to save their campaigns. That shows how dire things have gotten. I don't remember them doing this during the 2018 midterms when Trump lost control of the House. Trump has become so politically weak that he can't even prevent his own party members from running away from his brand. Will he honor any deal to let them do this? Probably not. He'll likely attack them anyway. But the fact that this is even happening shows just how vulnerable he's become.